everybody, welcome back to a Creative Book Club edition, and this month we are looking at Against Creativity by Oli Mould. I chose this book because it's very different from all the other creativity books out there, and I thought this sounds quite interesting. It sounds like it's going to have something interesting to say, and it sure does, but it is very different. So if you're interested in a really in-depth look at this, go over to our podcast and you will find that episode 11 is all about this book and goes into a lot more detail. I am now going to try and give you an overview in 5 minutes of a very in-depth book, and hope that the author doesn't actually see this video and complain about it. So I'm trying to get the main idea. The main idea here is that the idea of creativity has been co-opted by neoliberal capitalism in order to mean generating ideas for new products and services, and thereby it maintains the status quo. So we may think as being creatives that we are kind of challenging the system in some way or doing something a little bit different, when really what we're doing is upholding that very system. And so Oli Mould goes through the book and looking at different things and basically holds this to be true. So he looks first at work, and his idea in work is basically that recently, if you look at any type of job, you'll find that it says you need to be creative. But what does that actually mean? I mean, what does it mean for a nurse to be creative? Essentially what he's saying is that it connects with this idea of austerity, of doing more with less, and also of putting the responsibility onto the individual rather than the collective. So no longer are companies responsible for your training or whether you develop as a person within the company. You're responsible for that. And that links to one of the main points in the second chapter, which is about people. And he says that really what's happened here is that we've become more and more individualistic, and we have a tendency to focus more on what the individual can do than what the group can do. And I definitely see this because a lot of the work that I do is all about trying to find that intrinsic motivation, looking at yourself, analysing what you want, what's authentic for you, where you fit into the world, and not so much about where you fit into the system. Though of course we do systemic coaching as well, but it doesn't tend to be the system of the entire world or the capitalist system. It tends to be the system of the company or the system of the family that you're in. So this was an interesting point about people and individuals. He also says in this point that it's much easier to belong to the creative class. We assume that the creative class is a new kind of class that is not sort of upper, middle, lower, working class, whatever. It's a new kind of class. It's open to everybody. It says, yeah, it's open to everybody, but it is much easier to get in if you are white, if you are male, if you are middle class, if you're from the West, and if you're able-bodied. And he has an interesting discussion around diffability. The idea that actually, if instead of trying to convert differently abled people into able-bodied people in the same way, we actually stand back and go, well, what can this person do that I can't do? Because there are many people who have developed or were born with different skills, and those different skills allow us to be creative in a different way. He then talks about politics, and in politics he starts off talking about this idea of staged democracy, basically the idea of reality TV invading politics and then creating this problem that we don't know what's real and what's not real, and that often even intelligent people are judging arguments from politicians based on how eloquent they are or how they use rhetoric rather than exactly what they're saying politically. So there's some kind of double standards there. And also that there's an interesting point about how Netflix or different series have played forward different seemingly absurd situations in politics, which have then been accepted and then happened in real life. So there's kind of this idea that series could be complicit in dumbing down politics or making things happen because we start to accept that as an audience. And as an audience, we're little able to distinguish now between the pantomime of politics and the high quality series that we might see on Netflix. In the rest of this chapter, he talks about austerity. and how the financial crisis is a product of this idea of the creative class. If it wasn't for the type of financial innovation that came about in terms of junk bonds and CDIs, then we wouldn't be in this situation now. And that curiously, what's happening is that we're then asking the same thing that caused it to fix it. So not only has this been caused by this idea of a creative class, but the idea of austerity to fix it. And we're going to ask everybody to be more creative. So everybody is more creative. They're using their creativity and their energy to do stuff which the state previously had to do, and that now there is no collective. So it's very difficult for people to form collectives in different ways, because all of their energy and all of their creativity is being used in filling the gap that the state no longer holds. So some interesting points on politics. From there we move on to technology, and here he talks a lot about algorithms, particularly about how Silicon Valley kind of sucked up the algorithm, or the lifestyle that the algorithm could give, that was much cleaner and simpler than perhaps real life. And so that started becoming part of Silicon Valley business in contrast to East Coast business. And from there, through the applications that we all use, she says, wearing an iWatch, we are being almost controlled by algorithms in one way or another. He also talks about the algorithms associated with what we see and what we read, and basically highlights the point that if we are only seeing and only reading what the algorithm thinks we want to see, then we're not exposed to these different points of view. We're not able to get into any counterfactual headbutting that we usually did, or we used to do, when we would see people in person and talk about this. And that this is negative because we're not learning from the other side. This is what's led to a little bit to this polarization of different points of view. So the algorithm itself is keeping creativity down, it's keeping us ordered, it's keeping us in place, and that is something that's keeping that status quo of capitalism. The final part of the book is about the city, and this is really where Oli Mould is an expert. This is where he comes from a geography side of things, and he really talks about the idea of art washing, which is something that I'd never come across before. The idea that the arts are being used in order to make cities or parts of cities more attractive for gentrification. And he gives a few different examples of this where theatre and art, plastic arts, have been employed by developers in order to make different areas more interesting, such as Wynwood, Miami, and the Balfour Tower in London. So he talks in a lot of detail about that, and this for me was interesting. It was kind of surprising that I look around and go, oh, that looks interesting, that looks great, I'd like to be part of that. But quite often I don't think about maybe the impact on the group of people who actually live in that area. He talks about the Guggenheim in Bilbao being patient zero for this, and everybody, all the cities, trying to go after this Guggenheim Effect. This is using creativity to uphold capitalism and to help grow essentially money and make things worse for other people. So a really interesting book that highlighted a lot of things that I hadn't really thought of before. It's a lot more detailed than what I'm telling you here. These are just really the titles, the headlines from what was mentioned. I'd say it's definitely worth a read. It can be a bit hard going, so start with the podcast and then get the book afterwards, and see how it changes your opinion. What he doesn't do is give us some very clear ideas on how we might use this without kind of completely trashing capitalism, how we might use this new information in a way that could help to change the system. And that might be because he doesn't think it's possible, and that he really thinks the only way you can use creativity is by being revolutionary, which he does say at one point. So lots of food for thought, interesting book, go ahead and read it. And if you do read it, let me know what you think. Bye for now.